Hello? Look who they're calling selfish now. The word sits on your name like a stain they swear they didn't put there, even though you can trace it back to the exact moment you stopped bleeding for them. Funny how fast the language changes when the supply runs out. One day you're generous, reliable, the strong one. The next, you're cold, distant, disloyal, a problem that suddenly appeared the moment you chose yourself. They say it like an accusation, like you committed a crime by stepping away from a system that was quietly dismantling you. Like survival was a betrayal. Like choosing to live instead of slowly disappearing was some unforgivable act. And maybe the most revealing part isn't what they're calling you. It's when they started calling you that. Not when you asked for help. Not when you were exhausted. Not when you were drowning under expectations that were never meant to be yours alone. They didn't call you selfish when you stayed up late fixing problems that weren't yours. They didn't call you selfish when you kept forgiving what should have ended things years ago. They didn't call you selfish when you kept showing up half, empty, smiling through depletion, convincing yourself that love meant endurance. They called you selfish when you stopped. When you stopped answering every call, when you stopped explaining your pain, when you stopped shrinking to fit into places that only valued what you could provide, when you stopped making your exhaustion more convenient for them. That's when the story changed. For a long time, you weren't seen as a person. You were a role, a function, the one who carries, absorbs, smooths things over. The emotional infrastructure everyone leans on but no one maintains. You were useful, and usefulness, when mistaken for love, becomes a trap. You gave deeply, not performatively, not for applause. You gave in the quiet ways that never make it into anyone else's memory. The way you remembered what mattered to them, the way you stayed when it would have been easier to leave. The way you took on weight that wasn't yours because someone had to hold it, and you were the only one strong enough to do it. And slowly, without anyone announcing it, your needs became optional. Inconvenient, something to get to later. Your pain was acknowledged just enough to keep you functional, never enough to actually be addressed. You learned to translate, "I'm busy," into, "Your feelings can wait." You learned to swallow disappointment so often, it started to feel normal. You learned that being dependable meant being silent about what it cost you. That's the part they leave out now. They talk about how you changed, how you walked away, how you left them behind. They don't talk about how long you stayed past the point where it was hurting you. They don't talk about how many times you tried to fix things internally before you ever moved externally. They don't talk about the nights you negotiated with yourself, telling yourself to just last a little longer, to be a little more patient, to not make waves. Because if they acknowledged that, they'd have to face something uncomfortable. They'd have to admit you didn't leave suddenly. You disappeared slowly, piece by piece, until there was almost nothing left to give. You didn't wake up wanting to be labeled selfish. You woke up empty. There's a moment people don't see. The moment before you leave. The moment where something inside you goes quiet. Not angry, not dramatic, just done. The moment you realize that if you stay, you won't be noble. You'll be erased. And that staying loyal to something that's killing you isn't loyalty. It's self-abandonment. So you made a decision they weren't prepared for. You chose to disappoint them instead of destroying yourself. And that decision shattered the dynamic. Because systems built on your overgiving can't survive your boundaries. Relationships built on your silence can't survive your clarity. Roles built on your exhaustion collapse the moment you stop performing them. They felt it immediately, the shift, the absence. The way the air changed when you stopped being available in the same way. And instead of asking what changed, instead of reflecting on what they'd been taking without returning, They reached for the nearest explanation that protected their comfort. Selfish. It's a convenient word. It turns your survival into a flaw. It reframes your healing as harm. It allows them to avoid the mirror. Because if you're selfish, they don't have to ask why you left. If you're cold, they don't have to acknowledge how warm you were. If you're heartless, they don't have to reckon with how often they ignored your heart. So they rewrite the narrative. They tell each other you abandoned them. They talk about loyalty as if it only flows one direction. They say you changed, as if growth is a character defect. And they say it loud enough that sometimes, late at night, the old version of you almost believes it. Almost, but something is different now. You're not scrambling to correct the story. You're not sending long explanations into rooms that never listened in the first place. You're not defending yourself against people who only valued you when you were convenient. You're quiet, and not the empty quiet you used to carry. A grounded one. That silence unsettles them more than any argument ever could. Because it means you're no longer negotiating your worth. You're no longer asking to be understood. You're no longer auditioning for a role you outgrew. While they're busy talking about you, you're rebuilding. Not in a loud, performative way, not with announcements or dramatic exits. Quietly, privately, you're learning what it feels like to rest without guilt, to say no without rehearsing an apology, to exist without constantly scanning the room for who might need something from you. And in that space, something unexpected happens. You start to feel like yourself again, not the version of you that was shaped by obligation, not the version that learned to anticipate everyone else's needs at the expense of their own. A truer version, one that remembers what it's like to breathe without bracing for impact. They don't see that part. They just see the boundary and feel the loss of access. Because that's what changed. Really, access. They were used to having unlimited access to your time, your energy, your emotional labor. And when that access was revoked, it felt like punishment. Not because you did something to them, but because they lost something they'd been relying on without acknowledging. So they reach for guilt. They send messages that sound concerned but land heavy. They talk about how things used to be. They frame your absence as cruelty, your distance as punishment. But you know the truth. You didn't leave to teach them a lesson. You left because staying was teaching you the wrong one. And maybe the hardest part, the part that doesn't get talked about enough, is that walking away didn't feel empowering at first. It felt terrifying lonely. Like stepping off something familiar into open air. You questioned yourself. Wondered if you were overreacting. If maybe you should have stayed quieter, softer, more accommodating. But then something subtle happened. The world didn't end. The guilt didn't kill you. The judgment didn't consume you. The labels didn't define you. And each day you survived your own choice. You got a little stronger. You noticed how your body felt, without constant tension. How your mind wasn't always running emergency protocols. How peace, real peace, doesn't announce itself loudly. It just shows up one morning, and you realize you slept through the night. That's when the word selfish started to lose its sting. Because you saw it for what it was. Not a truth about you, but a reaction to losing control over you. You didn't become cruel. You became selective. You didn't lose empathy. You stopped directing it at people who weaponized it. You didn't abandon love. You abandoned the version of love that required you to disappear. And somewhere, whether you see it or not, people are watching. Not the loud ones rewriting the story, the quiet ones. The ones still stuck in dynamics that feel eerily familiar. They noticed that you left, that you survived, that you didn't come back begging, that you didn't collapse the way everyone said you would. They noticed that choosing yourself didn't turn you into a monster. It turned you into someone free. You weren't trying to be an example. You were just trying to stay alive. But sometimes, that's enough. Sometimes, the bravest thing someone can witness is another person refusing to die quietly. So let them call you selfish. Let the word sit where it belongs, in their mouths, in their stories, in the space where accountability should have been. You're not here to correct it. You're not here to argue with it. You're not here to return to a version of yourself that required self-erasure to be loved. You're moving forward now, slower, clearer, more intact. And the part they don't understand yet, the part that's still unfolding, is that this wasn't an ending. It was the first time you chose yourself without looking back, and that choice is still echoing. Here's what they don't see yet. Not fully, not clearly, because the moment you chose yourself didn't just close a chapter. It shifted the axis of your entire life. At first, it felt like loss, like stepping into a quieter world where familiar voices were suddenly gone, where routines dissolve, where the noise that once defined your days fell away so abruptly, it left a ringing silence behind. And in that silence, you had to face something you'd been avoiding for a long time, yourself. Not the version of you that exists in relation to other people, not the role you played, not the caretaker, the fixer, the emotional anchor. Just you, unfiltered, unassigned, unused. That's the part no one warns you about. Walking away doesn't immediately feel like freedom. It feels like withdrawal, like your nervous system doesn't know what to do without constant demand. You catch yourself waiting for the next crisis, the next call, the next moment where you're needed. And when it doesn't come, there's a strange emptiness. But that emptiness isn't absence. It's space you never had before. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, something begins to grow there. You start noticing how much energy you actually have when it isn't being siphoned off. How your thoughts move differently when they aren't shaped around anticipation and guilt. How your body relaxes when it's no longer bracing for disappointment. You realize how much of your personality was a response, a calibration, a survival strategy. You weren't dramatic. You were overwhelmed. You weren't too sensitive. You were surrounded by people who benefited from you not reacting. You weren't needy. You were starving in rooms where everyone else was eating. Once you step out of that environment, the fog lifts. And that's when the real transformation begins. Not the kind they'll ever see from the outside. Not something you can post or summarize or explain in a sentence. It happens internally, quietly. In the way you start trusting your own instincts again. In the way you stop second guessing your reactions. In the way your inner voice gets steadier instead of louder. You stop asking, "Am I wrong for this?" and start asking, "Why did I tolerate that?" That shift alone changes everything. You become harder to manipulate. Not because you're guarded, but because you're honest with yourself. You no longer need permission to leave conversations that feel wrong. You no longer over-explain boundaries to make them palatable. You no longer stay where your presence is tolerated, but not valued. And here's the part that truly unsettles the people who labeled you selfish. You don't replace them. You don't rush to fill the gap they left. You don't scramble to recreate the old dynamic with new faces. You let the space exist. You let yourself recalibrate. You let loneliness teach you the difference between solitude and neglect. That restraint, that refusal to immediately attach, is mistaken as coldness. But it's not. It's discernment. You're no longer building connections out of fear. You're choosing them from clarity. And that means fewer people have access to you now. Not because you're closed, but because you're selective. You understand. Finally, that not everyone deserves the same level of intimacy. that access is earned through consistency, respect, and reciprocity, not history or obligation. This is where your power actually comes from. Not from dominance, not from control, not from proving anything. From self-trust. You trust yourself enough to walk away without drama, to stay silent without resentment, to let people misunderstand you rather than explain yourself into exhaustion. You trust that the right people won't need convincing. They'll feel the difference immediately. And yes, the wrong people feel it too. They feel it as distance, as loss of influence, as the unsettling realization that their words no longer land the same way, that their guilt doesn't stick, that their narratives don't pull you back in. They feel your absence like a missing limb, because for a long time you were compensating for what they lacked. You were the emotional glue, the stabilizer, the one who made chaos manageable. Without you, they're forced to confront the parts of themselves you were quietly holding together. That's not your responsibility anymore. You've learned that lesson deeply now. Responsibility without reciprocity is exploitation. Loyalty without respect is self-betrayal. Love without safety is just endurance. You don't romanticize endurance anymore. You don't confuse aim with death. You don't confuse sacrifice with virtue. You don't confuse staying with strength. Strength, you've learned, sometimes looks like leaving calmly and never returning. And the most profound shift of all, you no longer need them to understand. That urge is gone. The need to be seen correctly by people who only saw you through the lens of their needs has evaporated. You've accepted something that once felt unbearable. Some people will always misunderstand you because understanding you would require them to change. And you're done waiting for that. Your life now moves forward with a different rhythm. Slower in some ways, more intentional. You choose rest without earning it, joy without justifying, distance without apology. You've stopped measuring your worth by how much you can give. You're learning how to receive without guilt. How to say no without explaining your trauma. How to let silence be silence, not something to fill. And in that stillness, something solid forms. A sense of self that isn't reactive. A confidence that doesn't need witnesses. A peace that doesn't depend on external approval. That's why the label selfish can't touch you anymore. Because you know what selfishness actually looks like now. It looks like people who drain others and call it love. It looks like systems that demand sacrifice but offer no care. It looks like relationships that collapse the moment one person stops carrying all the weight. What you did wasn't selfish. It was honest, and honesty always feels threatening to environments built on silence. You didn't leave to punish anyone. You left to save yourself. And in doing so, you rewrote something much bigger than a single relationship or dynamic. You broke a pattern, not just for you, but for anyone watching closely enough to see that it's possible. Possible to walk away. Possible to survive the guilt. Possible to build a life that doesn't require self-erasure. That ripple is still moving. You may never see all of it. You may never know how many people quietly took courage from your decision. How many conversations shifted because you refused to stay small? How many cycles ended because you stepped out of yours? But it's happening. And the irony is, the people who tried to shame you into staying will never understand the scale of what you did. They're still focused on the loss of access, still stuck in the story where you're the villain, still trying to reconcile your absence with their version of events. Meanwhile, you're somewhere else entirely, building a life that feels like yours, choosing relationships that feel mutual, living days that don't require recovery afterward. You're not angry anymore. You're not proving anything. You're not looking back to check who noticed. You're just moving forward. And that's the part they never planned for.